Hi, I'm Neil Saunders and welcome to the first edition of Retail Perspectives of the New Year. Well, as most of you know, we're now getting down to the last few baubles and bits of tinsel in the stores, so it's probably a good time to take a little bit of a retrospective look at the Christmas period and see what it actually held for retail. And I think there are probably 5 things that I'd reflect on out of this trading period. The first one, as everyone has been talking about, and indeed we predicted last year would happen, is that Christmas came very late. It actually was condensed really into the last 2 weeks when there was quite fervent activity on the high street and online with people going and buying things. Now, one of the interesting things that happened within that period is, although there was a last minute rush, it wasn't quite as good as retailers hoped or indeed predicted. And one of the reasons for that is because in that very last week, when people should have been doing a lot of shopping, the weather was extremely poor. And from our own data, we know that put a lot of people off going shopping. So we did get a last minute rush, but it wasn't quite as good as had been hoped for. Now that leads on to the second thing, because obviously what happened when that rush didn't quite materialise and when Christmas was very late is that retailers got nervous and there was a lot of discounting to try and stimulate activity, which is why there was such a sea of red across the high street. Now, that discounting was great for consumers because it meant there were lots of bargains on offers. Unfortunately, for retailers, it meant that some of them saw margin depletion, and we've seen that in some of the results that have come through to date. So it was a very promotional Christmas, perhaps more promotional than we've seen for the past 3 or 4 years. That said, the third point is there was growth. Some retailers saw very good growth over the Christmas period, and actually the market as a whole did grow, partly because of inflation, but partly because in some categories volumes were up despite the late start. So it wasn't a washout Christmas by any means. However, the fourth point is that actually it was a polarised Christmas. So although there were many winners that took advantage of that growth, there actually were some losers who didn't see the benefits of that growth. And we've already seen that coming through in the numbers, in the sense that there have been quite a lot of strong performances from players like John Lewis, from Ted Baker and the like, but actually there have been some pretty anemic performances as well from people like Tesco, for example, and also Marks and Spencer. So it's not been a win-win Christmas, it's actually been a polarised Christmas with winners in one camp and losers in the other. And that leads perhaps on to the fifth point, which is a bit of a change in dynamic from previous Christmases, in that actually some of the biggest losers we've seen to date have been in the grocery sector. We've seen some pretty poor results come from Tesco, we've seen some pretty poor results come from Morrison's, and actually some fairly flat results come from Sainsbury's, although they did just about eke into growth. Now, usually the grocers do very well at Christmas because they're the place we all go to buy food, and whilst we're there to buy food, we buy non-food as well. But actually what we saw this Christmas was a very big last-minute rush. When people were in store, they were focusing on buying the food and they didn't pick up quite so many non-food items. The other thing we saw on the food side is the discounters, the Aldis and the Lidls, doing extremely well, and they put a lot of pressure on all of the grocers at all levels of the grocery spectrum and actually were very successful in stealing customers. Now, in a market that's very saturated and competitive, their win essentially meant that a lot of other grocery players lost. So it was a very interesting Christmas, and it was a Christmas of mixed fortunes. The thing that I think we can take out of it is a lot of the trends that we saw over the Christmas period, the reluctance to buy, the pressure, the discounting, are probably going to be things that are reflected throughout 2014. So it will be a better year for retail in the year ahead, but there are still lots of pressure points, as Christmas has indicated.